Let's talk about term limits. Now, in the United States, there is only one elected federal position that has any kind of a term limit at all, and that position is the President of the United States. The Vice President does not have that same term limit applied because effectively they are not in control of the executive branch. Their duties are to run the Senate and basically wait around to take over control of the country should something happen to the president, and to report to Congress if there is a reason as to why the president themselves is not capable to run the country. I kind of talked about that in my 25th Amendment video. Now, what is the term limit? Well, the term limit for the United States president is 2 terms or 10 years. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that anybody elected to the office of president can serve up to 2 terms that they were elected to, where they were the person being voted for as president. Now, what does the 10 years mean? Well, that means if anybody has to become president while they were the vice president, or if something should have happened to the president and the vice president at the time, and the Speaker of the House became president, or down the line, if it was the Speaker pro tem of the Senate, or the Secretary of State, or any other cabinet position. If something happened and somebody besides the president had to become president and take over, they would get up to 2 years of the assumed term. They would finish out that term to its normal end date, and then they would have to be reelected for another term if they chose, but they are only allowed to resume or to carry out 2 years of a previous person's term and still get 2 terms of their own. That is why it is 2 terms or 10 years. Now, why is there a term limit at all? Well, in 1947, Congress proposed this amendment that was 2 years after the death of FDR. And within 4 years of it being proposed, it was passed. But again, why did they do it? Well, that was because of FDR. FDR had served for 4 terms. Now, how did he get to 4 terms? Well, in 1932, he was elected after the stock market crash of '29, where Herbert Hoover's policies were basically sit and wait, the market will fix itself. Well, after 3 years of it not fixing itself and people struggling, it was fairly easy for the people to switch parties, and they voted for the Democrat. So FDR comes in, starts fixing things start to get slightly better, and people are starting to, he's starting to work on some of his programs. Well, 4 years go by, things are still bad, but they're slightly better. He gets elected again. Same thing, things are improving. 1940 rolls around, things have improved, not great, they're better, and they elect him again. Well, 1941, we get attacked by Pearl Harbor. Now we're in the middle of World War II, and when it came time to re-elect in 44, the people wanted to keep the same person in control of the military to help us win the war. Economy was doing, again, better because of the war effort, because of getting his policies and getting us out of the Depression. Things were looking better, so they kept him around. They voted him back into office, and then he died in 45. So within 2 years of his death in 45, during the Truman administration, Congress said, hey, wait a minute, we don't like this idea of somebody being president for that many years. That's a long time for one person to have the presidency. We need to put a limit. And there was some discussion, and they decided on this 2 terms or 10 years limit. But why 2 terms? Well, to get to that answer, you have to go backward in history, and you go back to George Washington. Now, when George Washington became president under the Constitution, he was the first elected president basically in the world. This was a new thing. Our form of government was not something that was widely practiced at all. Like, most countries had a king, an emperor, a military ruler of some kind. That was how it happened. You got your position through conquest, through family bloodline or something like that, and you kept your power and you passed it on to your handpicked successor or your child or whatever. This idea of the people ruling themselves and them selecting from among themselves who to lead was a new idea. So when Washington gets elected to his first term, everyone's like, all right, he runs for a second term. He gets voted in again. Well, when it came time for him to run for a third term, most people thought he was going to win and win easily, and he probably could have. But he looked around and went, I'm done. It's time for me to transfer the power to someone else. We need, we don't need to keep having family rule like we are used to. We need to set this up that, yes, anybody can take over, anybody can run. So he chose not to run, and then when it came time, John Adams became president, and everything moved on. So when they went to look for this term limit, they looked back to George Washington and said, well, Washington set the bar himself at 2 terms. And they went with that. And aside from FDR, almost every other president had 2 terms or less. Now, Teddy Roosevelt did try to win a third term as a third-party candidate when he ran as a bull moose. He was not successful. But for the most part, every other presidential candidate kept to that 2-term limit on their own. So that's why we have the term limits. That's why it's set at 2 terms or 10 years. As far as term limits for other branches, well, there's been talk about putting a term limit in for the Supreme Court. Right now, the Supreme Court serves for life, barring impeachment and removal by the House and the Senate for bad behavior, for high crimes and misdemeanors. There has been talk about them putting in some kind of a term limit that would require a constitutional amendment. Same thing for members of the House and senators. Right now, there are no limits. They can serve for as many years as they choose, leading to some lifelong politicians that are in Congress for 30, 40 years or more. But in order to get any sort of a term limit, those would need to be passed through the amendment process that I've talked about in a previous video. And if they were able to put some sort of an amendment forward, I think they would end up putting forward some kind of a clause like they had built into the 22nd Amendment, which gave us presidential term limits, which said any person elected to the office at the time of the ratification would not be bound by the new regulation until after their term. So what that meant was when they for the presidential term, when they ratified it, should there be a president in office that was on their third term, they would be able to finish that term. They wouldn't be immediately kicked out. So I'm guessing they would do the same thing for congressional representatives, for senators, for Supreme Court justices. There would be some sort of a wiggle room there. But again, that would take an amendment. As I talked about in a previous video, there's a high bar to get those done. So anyway, that was just a little snippet as to what term limits are and how they apply to the president and why they are set the way they are.